back, and without further ado, I'll turn it over to Mark.
Thank you for the invitation to present to the forum today. I apologize for my delay arriving here. There was a massive thunderstorm at the Dallas-Fort Worth airport yesterday, creating all havoc, and nobody was going nowhere as a result. This morning, the local news focused on two big stories. One, obviously, the presidential primaries from the evening before, but the other was the number of claims that had already rolled into insurance companies as a result of hail damage in the area. I've dealt with insurance companies. Maybe you have too. I had a part of my house burned a couple of years ago, and I had trouble mustering sympathy for the insurance companies who are now complaining about the complaints that they're receiving. I am Senior Director for Landscape Conservation for Defenders of Wildlife. We are a national conservation organization focused on conserving wildlife and habitat across the country. I've also worked to conserve sage-grouse species for more than 15 years. I'm pleased to offer our perspectives on Gunderson Sage-Grouse conservation and management, and I am chagrined to have missed the presentations this morning. I'm very much looking forward to see them, and I'm concerned now that much of what you might hear could be repeated from this morning. I do apologize if that's the case. Defenders of Wildlife supports the Endangered Species Act, both the purpose and the proper application of the law. The ESA serves as a safety net for imperiled species and provides a structure to support conservation and recovery of listed plants and animals. The Act works. More than 99% of species listed under the law persist today. Admittedly, some are faring better than others, but the pace of delisting has actually increased in recent years. Notably, species with critical habitat designation under the ESA are twice as likely to be recovering as those without. Now, Defenders of Wildlife was interested to know how those who live, work, and recreate among Gunnison Sage-Grouse feel about ESA listing a year after the decision was made. We hired Tulchin Research to poll voters in Gunnison, Montrose, Saguache, and San Miguel counties, the heart of Gunnison Sage-Grouse range. The poll was conducted the third week of February, and I think you may be interested to see the results. First, voters in Gunnison country know their grouse. No surprise there. With 58% indicating that they're aware of the species, and 84% of those respondents reporting that they view the species favorably. And I've been to Gunnison before. I understand, appreciate, and have detected that local pride in Gunnison Sage-Grouse. The poll also found, oh, hold on, sorry, did I get that one? Okay, there's the 84%, moving on. Residents are also highly aware of efforts to protect Gunnison Sage-Grouse. Again, an indication of local community involvement in species conservation and concern for species conservation. In fact, residents overwhelmingly agree that listing Gunderson Sage-Grouse as threatened has encouraged conservation efforts for the species. And almost the same majority, 66%, back continued listing of Gunderson Sage-Grouse until the species is fully recovered. Now these Results extend across the region and across the political spectrum. They're also reflective of other statewide polls in Colorado and across the country that have found broad support for species conservation and the Endangered Species Act. So you're not alone. As I understand it, there was a poll conducted here locally in 2004 and research done in the last couple of years that also suggests that there's a lot of local support for species conservation and even Endangered Species Act listing if necessary to conserve Gunderson Sage-Grouse. This is not new to you. The state of Colorado began working with communities and private landowners to implement conservation measures for Gunnison Sage-Grouse in the early 1990s. Counties have also spearheaded important efforts to conserve the species and its habitat. The investment by private landowners in conservation is particularly impressive. As you well know, landowners have executed conservation easements on more than 100,000 acres in Gunnison Sage-Grouse range. My perusal of the available sources found that more than 7,200 acres were conserved again just in 2015. Now the ESA is wholly consistent with these local conservation efforts. For example, the Act requires no permit, lays no other requirements on landowners and others who are working to conserve the species or not otherwise harming the animals or its habitat. Even in the rare instances where minor harm may be likely, for example, a controlled burn or a vegetation management project, the Fish and Wildlife Service can easily issue an enhancement of survival permit under Section 10 of the ESA to authorize the activity. The ESA also incentivizes local voluntary efforts in many ways. In fiscal year 2015, for example, the service had approximately $50 million available to distribute to states under the ESA Cooperative Endangered Species Conservation Fund. In 2004, let me make sure I get these numbers correct, the service awarded 13 grants for habitat conservation planning, 16 distributions for land acquisition for species recovery, and 257 other species conservation grants to states and U.S. territories. These monies are available to states upon application. The Act also encourages landowners to conserve listed species through a variety of legal assurances. For example, voluntary candidate conservation agreements with assurances. Many in this community are already aware of what those are. Offer legal predictability to participants. As long as a participant carries out obligations under the agreement, the service will not require a landowner to do anything more to conserve the covered species. Typically because you don't have to. Safe harbor agreements are another tool available to eliminate legal risk to landowners who want to restore habitat on their lands in an effort to attract a listed species. There are no surprises clauses in plans called habitat conservation plans that also facilitate conservation at the local and regional level. In fact, conserving ESA listed species wouldn't be possible in many instances without state and local support. While the service develops recovery plan for listed species, it's usually the states and the locals who've got to help execute those provisions. And the service has recognized this vital relationship between the federal government and states by recently revising its policies to encourage even more state-federal collaboration and cooperation in species conservation. Now, conservation planning and management on federal public lands will be key to protecting Gunderson Sage-Grouse. The increased attention on Gunderson Sage-Grouse has prompted the Bureau of Land Management, I think you've heard about this earlier this morning, to develop a land use plan amendment for the species, affecting 600,000 acres of service state in 11 BLM resource management areas in 12 counties in Colorado and Utah. This landscape level approach is similar to the National Greater Sage-Grouse Planning Strategy, a comprehensive and exhausting effort by the Bureau of Land Management to conserve greater sage-grouse across an 11-state range. That was a commendable effort to bolster sage-grouse conservation on public lands, but we also noticed some concerns with the final plans. For example, most of the plans failed to identify and adequately protect sage-grouse winter habitat. The records of decision also did not offer guidance for how to manage the species and sage-grouse steppe in the face of known effects of climate change. And none of the plans designated sage-grouse reserves in a formal way. For example, areas of critical environmental concern that might have amplified protections for sage-grouse and other wildlife. We hope that our experience with the National Greater Sage-Grouse Strategy will be helpful in the development of the Gunnison Sage-Grouse Land Use Plan Amendment, and we look forward to reviewing the draft EIS sometime later this spring. By the way, improved management for sage-grouse and sage-grouse steppe not only helps to balance and ensure sustainable production of food, fiber, and minerals from the public domain, but also helps support a booming recreational economy in the West. An important study was done a couple of years ago, or a year ago, that found that recreational pursuits on sagebrush lands managed by the BLM are valued at $1 billion annually. See, finally our ecosystem is getting a little bit of attention. Gunnison sage-grouse can be recovered. Successful conservation will require using all of the tools at our disposal, from federal law to local conservation strategies. And things are moving in the right direction. Thank you. For example, the NRCS's Sage-Grouse Initiative, which I think you learned about this morning, is both an important program and evidence of the federal government's continued commitment to species conservation locally and across the West. But I would suggest that more could be done to conserve and recover Gunnison sage-grouse. The service needs to prepare a recovery plan for the species. The state of Colorado could also update the Gunnison sage-grouse range-wide conservation plan, which was developed in 2005, with new information to guide state and local conservation efforts for the bird. Counties could also consider ways to strengthen local ordinances and plans to conserve sage-grouse habitat. Now, these recovery strategies must use quantifiable, objective criteria to measure the success of the conservation measures. Having population goals, for example, is helpful for not only tracking their progress, but also producing a strategy that is defensible to critics from outside the community. We must continue to develop and share information on the grouse. The more we know, the more effectively and efficiently we can conserve and restore the bird and its habitat to support redundant, resilient populations from across the terrain. Gunnison sage-grouse are a quintessential part of the American West and a signature species for this community. Listen, I'm a Westerner who moved back east. I'm waiting for that ticket to come back. In the meantime, I have to acknowledge that the Easterners kind of blew it with the heat map. We lost our ground nesting grouse. We look forward to working with you all, stakeholders, to conserve and recover Gunnison sage-grouse so they can persist for generations to come. Thank you very much.
Do you have time for any questions for Mark?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. You've been mentioning that you want to evict the recovery important thing. Why are the organizations that are driving the listing focusing on top-down management rather than bottom-up management, since all the accomplishment has been achieved locally by local initiative in spite of Washington and the courts?
Mm-hmm. Well, if you may have picked up, one of the themes of my presentation is that there are federal resources available to support state and local efforts, and you should take advantage of those. Where necessary, however, it may be helpful to have some direction from Washington or from the state BLM office, for example, to ensure that federal agencies are also doing their part to conserve the species. As you've noted, a lot of work has been done locally. It's important that federal land agencies develop programs, prescriptions, management prescriptions, to ensure that the public lands are also contributing to the species conservation. Sometimes that can originate from a local field office or a state BLM office. Sometimes it's helpful to have some direction from Washington. Usually it requires both.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I was just wondering why you didn't include Dolores County or San Juan County, Utah in your survey.
Two reasons. Good question. Thank you. One, polls are expensive. And it was all I could do to make sure that we at least got a representative sample from the region. These 4 counties, as you measure both the Gunderson Sage-Grouse occupied range and designated critical habitat, include the majority of those areas. I would have liked to have done a more regional poll or a region-wide poll, and I'm hopeful that we can do this again, perhaps in a year or two, to see how people are feeling about listing and the success of conservation efforts in the future.
All right. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.